Charles Manson, a name that still sends chills through American history. The mastermind behind the 1969 Tate LaBianca murders, Manson never held the knife himself. Instead, he commanded his followers, the so-called Manson family, to kill. What he lacked in power, he made up for in control, manipulation, and a warped vision of the world. But while the murders shocked the nation, Manson's story did not end in 1969. In fact, the darkest chapters of his life played out behind prison walls, where he spent nearly half a century until his death in 2017. From cult leader to inmate. After his arrest in December of 1969, Manson entered the California prison system as one of the most infamous men alive. His trial was sensational, broadcast across the country, and the details of the murders, including the brutal killing of actress Sharon Tate, horrified the world. In 1971, Manson was sentenced to death, but fate had other plans. When California abolished the death penalty in 1972, his sentence was commuted to life in prison without parole. That single legal change ensured that Charles Manson would never step foot outside a prison yard again. Manson was first housed at San Quentin State Prison, one of California's toughest facilities. There, he quickly gained a reputation for his odd behavior and his ability to attract attention. Guards reported that other inmates looked at him with a strange mix of fear and fascination. Despite being locked away, Manson's myth was only growing. He was not just another murderer. He was already becoming a twisted legend. From San Quentin, Manson was transferred to other facilities, including Folsom Prison and, eventually, Corcoran State Prison, where he would spend much of his life. In each location, the story was the same. Manson caused trouble, disobeyed rules, and lived as if the prison system could never contain his influence. He might have been behind bars, but his cult of personality survived. Prison records show that Manson committed dozens of rule violations during his time behind bars. He threatened staff, possessed contraband, and refused to follow orders. He was considered a high-risk inmate, meaning he was kept under heavy surveillance and often in isolation. Yet, despite his restrictions, Manson continued to find ways to communicate with the outside world. In the 1980s and 1990s, he became a kind of underground celebrity. He gave bizarre interviews with reporters, rambling about helter-skelter, the apocalypse, and how he never killed anyone with his own hands. To his supporters, he was a misunderstood prophet. To everyone else, he was a manipulative killer who enjoyed the spotlight. Life in prison did not soften Manson. Instead, it hardened him further. In 1984, an inmate attacked him in the prison hobby shop, pouring paint thinner on him and setting him on fire. Manson survived, but he was left with burns covering 20% of his body. Even that incident only added to his legend. Charles Manson, the man who even prison could not kill. As years turned into decades, parole hearings became a grim ritual. Each time Manson was brought before the parole board, he ranted, rambled, or threatened. He never expressed remorse for the 7 people murdered on his orders in 1969. Each hearing ended the same way: parole denied. His last hearing was in 2012, when he was 77 years old. The board concluded that Manson still posed a danger to society. By the 2000s, Manson was an old man. Yet even then, he found ways to stay in the headlines. Guards discovered cell phones smuggled into his cell, proving he was still trying to influence the world beyond the prison gates. He even received marriage proposals from young women on the outside, some of whom claimed to be in love with him. But for all the chaos he stirred, prison life was a slow death sentence. Confined to his cell, often in protective custody, Manson lived a far different reality than the cult leader he once was. The man who had once controlled an army of followers was reduced to a frail inmate, watched constantly by guards, and feared by no one but himself. By the time Manson entered his final years at Corcoran State Prison, he had become less of a threat and more of a symbol, a reminder of what happens when charisma and madness collide. But as Chapter 2 reveals, even behind bars, Charles Manson's life was far from ordinary. The madness behind bars. Inside prison, most inmates eventually fall into routine. Head counts, meals, jobs, recreation, lights out. But Charles Manson was never one to follow rules. His prison life was a constant battle between the system trying to contain him and his determination to remain larger than life. One of the most disturbing aspects of Manson's prison years was his ability to continue attracting followers. Even as he aged and grew frail, letters poured in from admirers, many of them young women who had been born long after the murders. Some even tattooed his face or his swastika symbol on their bodies. To prison officials, this was proof that Manson still had a dangerous influence, even without direct contact. Contraband became a recurring problem. Reports show that Manson was caught with everything from sharp weapons to cell phones. One of the most notable cases happened in 2009, when guards discovered he had been using a smuggled phone to communicate with followers. He had made hundreds of calls and texts, showing once again that his reach extended far beyond his prison cell. Manson's strange behavior also made headlines. In interviews, he often contradicted himself, denying responsibility for the murders while also claiming credit for inspiring fear. He carved the infamous swastika into his forehead during his trial and continued to display it proudly in prison. He sometimes sang songs he had written before the murders, reminding people of his failed dream to be a rock star. For the inmates around him, Manson was less a leader and more a spectacle. Some saw him as a relic of the past, while others feared his erratic behavior. Yet prison guards noted that he was often isolated, kept away from the general population because of his notoriety and his history of rule-breaking. Despite this, Manson managed to turn prison into a stage. Every parole hearing became an opportunity to speak. Instead of apologizing or asking for forgiveness, he used the hearings to rant about society, race wars, and his so-called philosophies. At one hearing, he even declared, "I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine, and a straight razor if you get too close to me." It was nonsense to most, but it was classic Manson, unpredictable, unsettling, and designed to shock. By his final years, Manson's health was in steep decline. Reports noted that he suffered from gastrointestinal bleeding and other age-related conditions. In November 2017, after nearly 5 decades behind bars, he was transferred from Corcoran State Prison to a hospital in Bakersfield, California. There, the cult leader who once commanded young followers to kill died at age 83. His death did not bring closure. Disputes broke out over who would claim his body. Multiple people, including former followers and even women who claimed to be his fiancées, fought in court to take possession of Manson's remains. In the end, he was cremated and his ashes scattered. But even in death, Charles Manson stirred chaos. The prison system had kept him alive for nearly 50 years, but it could never contain his reputation. For some, Manson became a symbol of the failures of rehabilitation, proof that some people cannot be changed. For others, he was a monster whose very existence served as a warning about the dangers of blind loyalty and manipulation. What is certain is that Manson's prison life was unlike any other. Most inmates fade into obscurity. Their names are forgotten, their crimes remembered only by a few. But Manson remained infamous until the very end. His bizarre antics, his continued influence, and his refusal to show remorse kept him in the spotlight, even when locked away. In the end, Charles Manson spent 48 years behind bars. From death row to maximum security, from contraband smuggling to bizarre interviews, he turned prison into a stage. He never walked free again, but he never stopped being Charles Manson, manipulator, cult leader, and symbol of evil. His prison life is a chilling reminder that even walls, bars, and guards cannot silence some of the darkest voices in history.